Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a really simple but effective method for painting rust. So what we have here is one of the side parts for a Space Marine Rhino. It's one of the spare ones from a Forge World one I've got, and we're going to be using this to demonstrate how to do the rust. So I've painted the two panels with the Vallejo Russian uniform that I usually use on the Death Guard ones, and we're just going to use a little bit of Seraphim Sepia to bring out some of the details, do some of the edges and get some of that initial rusty grime and a few little runs on there around a few different areas. Now I thought I'd do it on one of these ones rather than on a fully painted section, just so you can see exactly how you're doing the rust and the weathering effects that I've been using. And there's nothing else that sort of distracts from that on this miniature. It's literally sprayed with Citadel Grey Seer and then those panels with the Russian uniform. Now we're just going to apply the Seraphim Sepia to get that initial layer of grime on there. So what you want to be doing is going around all of the edges, and where you've got the little bolts and the rivets, you want to go around each of those, get a little bit of that so you've got the sepia on there. I should really be using a thinner brush for this, but it doesn't matter too much because it's the initial layer. You want to get some of the runs running down from those little bolts and from the underside of the exhaust, from the little ridge at the bottom of the Russian uniform section. Now partway through I will paint the top of that exhaust with Citadel lead belcher just so I can show the weathering on that too. But this is what we're trying to do for the initial section, is just paint these runs down each of the bolts and down all these areas. So here I'm using a Citadel small layer brush for a change. I'm not using the Wargamer character brush that I usually do to do the detail work. Citadel small layer brush has got a wicked point on it too. And also I don't really want to use the finest brushes to put on the shades, because sometimes if you use too many shades and things like that with your brush, it will make the bristles splay apart a little bit. So that's why when you see me putting the shades on, I tend to use a slightly thicker brush. But for this, because you're using it to detail it using the shades, the small layer brush is fine. So next up we're just going to use a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, and all this is for is to darken a few of the little areas and put a few little extra runs on to where we put the sepia already. Now because of the way the rust's going to work and the way that's going to detail, you don't really need to put too much of these on. You put plenty of them when you're doing like the Death Guard Plague Marines and the power armor and things like that, so you get all the different coloured streaks on them. But for the actual tank, if you do that all over, it does become a bit busy and look a bit too much. So we're just going to do a few little bits to darken up some little areas on it, and then we can move on to the next one. So with that dry, we're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Typhus Corrosion. This is where we start adding the actual rust to it. So on this, all I'm going to be doing is thinking about the areas where it's likely to have started corroding. So like this bottom edge here, where you get moisture collecting on it, you get rain and what have you. And obviously if it's in somewhere nergly, it's not going to be too pleasant and dry. It's going to be quite dank and revolting. So you're probably going to get a lot of stuff building up on the ledges there, and that's probably going to rot away at the armour of the Rhino. So just choose a few areas where you want to add this to, and then paint this on. When you're doing the Typhus Corrosion, it's always worth trying to get some of the texture onto the areas. Sometimes you can paint it on, you'll just get the paint, but make sure you get some of the texture on there too. When you paint it on, make sure that it is the dark brown colour when you put it on. If you put it on too thin, it will sort of show some of the colour beneath it a little bit. So if you do that, just give it another layer on top of that, that's fine. Just so you've got that nice dark brown colour of the Typhus Corrosion, because that makes a really, really good base for the rust. So at the end effect for the rust, I really do think it looks quite good. Although it's a really good look to it, it's actually a really, really simple method of doing rust. Very, very effective, very quick to do, and it doesn't really take that much time either. The longest time is because you're doing it over a whole tank. It's just because of the surface area you're culling, but if you're just doing it over a small area on something, it takes no time at all, but it looks great. So I'm just going to be working on this front panel here. because to paint the whole thing would take a lot longer. It'd make the video a lot longer. Once you've got the Typhus corrosion in place, leave it to dry, and then we can move on to the next part. Next thing we're going to be using is a little bit of Citadel Ryza rust. We're going to be using this across all of the parts that we put the Typhus corrosion on. So Ryza rust is the Citadel dry paint. So you want to be getting some on your brush, wiping off the excess on like a piece of paper or something like that. And then you're just going to gently dry brush that onto the areas of Typhus corrosion. Now you don't want it to be an even spread, so you don't want the rust and the lumps and the ridges to all be the same shade of orange. You want it to be really varied, so if you're putting some across the edge in one area, you don't want it to be all the way along those edges. You don't want every single edge to be rusted up or it looks like a strange yellow highlight, so just use it on some parts but not others. But the main thing is that you're getting a hint of orange all over it, with some parts being brighter and some parts being darker. You can do that with the amount of dry brushing over it that you do. If you finish up and you look at it and some parts are looking a bit similar or some parts are looking too dark, just get a little bit more and add that as you go along. Even if it's onto the next layer and you decide you want to change part of it, that's fine. So if there's any kind of techniques or anything like that that you want to see done on vehicles, like maybe as though it's been hit by a shell or ricochets or scrapes or anything like that, let me know, because I do have quite a number of these Rhino sides. I've got some of the Rhinos for 30k, and each of them comes with resin pieces for the sides of it, but the kits come with these plasty bits as well. So I've got quite a few of these that we can use to do videos on, so let me know if there's anything you want to see in terms of vehicle damage or effects that you can do on vehicles. Once you've done that, it's on to the next colour. So what we're going to use now is a little bit more Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this, get a little bit on your brush, and all you're going to do is gently brush it from the painted area towards the rust. You always want to be dragging the brush towards the rust when you're doing this, and the idea is to discolour the area around those rust spots. So here you can see me dragging it towards the rust, and I'm just going to turn it around this way so you can see what happens when you drag it away. So you're dragging it away from the rust spot, and where you take the brush off the paintwork, you can see that the sepia pools at the end where you've taken the brush off. So by brushing it down onto the rust spots, it means that those little bits of darker sepia are going to be on the rust and you're going to see them. And it just means that the area that you've kind of discoloured around those rust spots is not going to have kind of spots of sepia, like lumps of sepia, where it's darker and quite obvious. When you've got that sorted, you can move on to the next layer. So next up is Citadel Fuegan Orange Shade. What we're doing here is we're going to use it in a similar way to we've just done discoloration with the sepia, but instead you're going to be using that to discolour the little areas of Typhus corrosion, not all of them, just little bits here and there, and that gives the dark brown a bit of more orange colour, like a deep orange colour. We're also going to use it to discolour the areas around and beneath some of the Typhus corrosion areas. And that just gives that orangey colour that you see when you see like rusted vehicles or big piece of metal that are rusting away and you have those streaks and orange runs running down them. So just going to use this to discolour some of these areas and just add another colour to those sections. So now you've got that. We're going back to Citadel Seraphim Sepia once more, We're going to use the small layer brush again, and we're just going to do some really thin streaks. And what this is representing is when you see rust and streaks of the grime and the brown and the orange running down from them, this is to represent streaks that have come on later than the discolorations with the original Sepia. It's come on later than the discolorations with the Fuegan orange, and so you've got different layers of that discoloration that makes it look like it's happened over time, and you've got different effects there. And that should get it looking rough and horrible. Once you've finished them, that is the final layer. So this is the final bit of weathered vehicle that we've done. That does look pretty cool. It's ideal for the Death Guard, but if you're weathering any scenery or anything like that, it's really good for that still. It's not a very, very long technique if you're doing it over small areas. It does take a bit of time if not. But when you're doing it on tanks and stuff, this is the kind of effect that you can get from it. And this is from the Death Guard video that I put up last Wednesday. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, please head to our coffee page linked below where you can buy us a brew. Thanks very much.